Hello and welcome back. This is Dr. Jimmy Flores with Coal Derby Academy. We are moving along and now in closed procurement, the last process in the procurement management plan. While it sounds simple, the fact that we have to close a procurement, the fact is that sometimes it doesn't happen. And when a procurement is left open, guess what? South Dakota doesn't know any better, and they're going to keep issuing checks. I use South Dakota as an example. All I'm saying is that the remote accounts payable department or the headquarters even will not know, and they will continue to pay on that procurement. The project manager and the team must ensure that all procurements are closed. It is a best practice. It is due diligence, and it has to get done. Let's get going. The alignment of closed procurements, it is aligned with the closing process group and the procurement management knowledge area. Please note, there are only two processes in closing. Number one is close project or close the phase and close procurements. A question that sometimes shows up on the exam is, do we know the two processes in closing? Well, yes, we do. It's close project or phase and close procurements. Now, the other part of the question is, what about the order in which they are carried out? Well, what would you do first? Will you close the procurement or will you close the project or phase? Which one? That's right. You would first close the procurement and then the project or phase. The procurement has to be closed first, otherwise it might stay open. In South Dakota, we'll keep issuing checks. Definition and key benefit of closed procurements. The definition. Closed procurements is the process of completing each procurement. Please note, all procurements must be closed. The key benefit of the closed procurements process is that it documents agreements and related documentation for future reference. This future reference information becomes part of lessons learned. Question number one, what are the two inputs to the closed procurements process? What do we need to work on closed procurements? The answer coming up. The answer to question number one, the two inputs to the closed procurements process are number one, project management plan, and two, procurement document. Let's review the definitions. The project management plan is a document that describes how the project will be executed, monitored, and controlled. You know what the project management plan is by now. We've covered it many times. Procurement documents. The documents used in bid and proposal activities, which include the buyer's invitation for bid, invitation for negotiations, request for information, request for quotation, request for proposal, and seller's responses. Question number two, what are the three tools and techniques of the closed procurements process? How are we going to do it? The answer coming up. The answer to question number two, the three tools and techniques of the closed procurements process are, number one, procurement audits, number two, procurement negotiations, and three, records management system. Let's continue this discussion on the next slide. Continuing the discussion with the tools and techniques of the process closed procurements. Here we have procurement audits and records management system. Procurement audits. The review of contracts and contracting processes for completeness, accuracy, and effectiveness. Please note that audits are proactive. We would rather fix a problem before it occurs. In other words, we're trying to do things right the first time. Audits is proactive, not reactive. If we can avoid a problem by reviewing contracts and the contracting processes, then we are going to be in better shape. What specifically are we doing? Well, we're looking at the contracting processes and the contracts for completeness, for accuracy and effectiveness. Do we know the deliverable date? Do we know the contract terms? Are we aware that perhaps the contractor is subcontracting? Well, it would be good if someone on our team performs a procurement audit so that we're all aware of the situation. Next, records management system. Specific set of processes, related control functions, and tools that are consolidated and combined to record and retain information about the project. We now have more information about the project, and we can include it when done in the lessons learned. Question number 3. What are the two outputs of the closed procurements process? What do we have when we are done with this process? The answer coming up. The answer to question number 3, the two outputs of the closed procurements process are, number 1, closed procurements, and 2, organizational process assets updates. Obviously, when we are done with the process called closed procurements, we're going to have a closed procurement, right? And we also are going to update the OPAs, the organizational process assets. Specifically, a closed procurement. Let's take a look at that definition. These are project contracts or other procurement agreements that have been formally acknowledged by the proper authorizing agent as being finalized and signed off. Some agent, someone with authority, must give us a sign off so that we know the procurement is closed. We cannot just assume that, okay, it has been finalized, everything's okay. In many cases, because we're dealing with contracts, it has to be formal. And accounts payable must have that formality in place before they can stop the payment process. Be careful here. The project is going to end and everyone is going to be relieved, thinking, holy cow, that project is over. I don't want anything to do with it. And we forget to close the procurement. Guess what? We're going to be in hot water when those checks keep going, or when the vendors or contractors start contacting us about payment and we have no idea what's going on. Let's just hope it doesn't go as far as a lawsuit or other breach of contract that causes us headaches. Now we're working on another project, but because we did not proceed and close the procurements, we have to come back and review the contracts, spend more time, waste more energy. It's not fun. Let's get it done right the first time. Question number 4. Closed procurements is in which process group? Pretty easy, right? Let's review the answer. To question number 4, closed procurements is in the closing process group. Remember, there are two processes in closing. Number 1, closed project or phase, and closed procurement. Which one do we perform first? That's right. We close the procurements and then we close the project or phase. Going back to closed project or phase. Closed project means we close the entire project. Closed phase means that the project is a huge project and we're closing phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. What happens here is after phase 1, we go back to initiating and then planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. And then you close that phase, let's say that phase 2, and then you do it again. Initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing, close phase 3. If that's the end of the project, then you close the project. On huge projects that have big deliverables, we might break them down into more information regarding the closed procurements process. The closed procurements process also involves administrative activities such as finalizing open claims, updating records to reflect final results, and archiving such information for future use. The process addresses each contract applicable to the project or project phase. Moving on, early termination of a contract is a special case of procurement closure that can result from a mutual agreement by both parties, from the default of one party, or for the convenience of the buyer if provided for in the contract. A key point here is that it's spelled out in the contract. We just can't make it up along the way. The other part here is that sometimes the buyer will go out of business, the seller will go out of business, or a product or service will be obsolete. We can close the procurement based on those circumstances. However, Regardless of the situation, we must go through the process of closing the procurement and then closing the project or phase. These steps, while they seem boring, tedious, or whatever, they must be completed. Here are inputs to close procurements. First, the project management plan contains the procurement management plan, which provides the details and guidelines for closing out procurements. Thus, you have an idea here that a potential question on the exam might be, which plan provides the information, the details, and guidelines relative to closing out procurements? That plan is the procurement management plan, not the project management plan. However, we know the procurement management plan is part or a subsidiary of the project management plan. If you are asked specifically, you must pick procurement management plan. Next, all procurement documents are collected, indexed, and filed to close a contract. Information on contract schedule, scope, quality, and cost performance, along with all contract change documentation, payment records, and inspection results are cataloged. Why are they cataloged? Because we need this information for future use. How so? Lessons learned. Lessons learned is what went well on the project and what did not go well. Let's catalog it, preferably in some automated way so that we can have easy access. Let's be smart with the way we run our projects. Tools and techniques of closed procurements. First, a procurement audit is a structured review of the procurement process originating from the planned procurement management process through controlled procurements. The objective of a procurement audit is to identify successes and failures that warrant recognition in the preparation or administration of other procurement contracts on the project or on other projects within the organization. Please review the item on the right related to examine and evaluate. The focus is, how was the evaluation? What about the procurement audit? Was it a successful contract? What about the list of successes and failures? Lessons learned, right? The other one's a big one too. Were the changes implemented correctly? Did they work as expected? This is a good reflection exercise. Let's continue. Procurement negotiations are the primary choice for the final equitable settlement of all outstanding issues, claims, and disputes. Negotiation is a key skill set for a project manager. Question number 5, true or false? Procurement negotiations are the last choice for an organization to settle outstanding issues, claims, and disputes when closing a contract. Do you agree? Let's review. Is false. Procurement negotiations are not the last choice for an organization to settle outstanding issues, claims, and disputes when closing a contract. The explanation. Procurement negotiations are the primary choice for the final equitable settlement of all outstanding issues, claims, and disputes. Whenever settlement cannot be reached through direct negotiation, some form of alternative dispute resolution or ADR, including mediation or arbitration, may be explored. This is often an exam question asking you if you even know what ADR is, alternative dispute resolution. This is a form of mediation or arbitration, and the idea is to get the parties together to solve their own issues so that we don't have to go to civil court. It's far better for both parties to work it out. Even our court system will allow ample time for the two disagreeing parties to look at the situation and come to a mutual understanding, work out the situation so that we don't have to waste more time, money on the issue. Once it gets to court, really, it can be a jump ball. So when you are a buyer or a seller, regardless of who you are, the attorneys are going to urge you to work it out, to look at the options, to focus on win-win or compromise, because if we're not willing to budge, we are going to end up at the courthouse. The tool and technique Records management system. A records management system is used by the project manager to manage contract and procurement documentation and records. Contract documents and correspondence are archived through the records management system as part of the closed procurements process. The output, closed procurements. Closed procurements are usually defined in the terms and conditions of the contract through formal procurement closure requirements. The buyer, usually through its authorized procurement administrator, provides the seller with formal notice that the contract has been completed. Please be aware of the point that the buyer provides notice that the procurement has been closed. That's smart. That's proactive. The output, organizational process assets updates. The OPA updates may include, first, procurement file, a complete set of indexed contract documentation, including the closed contract, is prepared for inclusion with the final project files. Next, deliverable acceptance. Documentation of formal acceptance of seller-provided deliverables may be required to be retained by the organization. Requirements for formal deliverable acceptance and how to address non-conforming deliverables are usually defined in the agreement. As part of the process of accepting deliverables, there has to be a plan in place. It really goes back to our requirements gathering. Did we meet the requirements? Through the requirements traceability matrix, if you remember that, we talked about that in scope management, right? Through the requirements traceability matrix, we can determine if we're meeting the business needs of the customer. If so, this part, deliverable acceptance, should be okay. Finally, lessons learned documentation. Lessons learned, what has been experienced, and process improvement recommendations should be developed for the project file to improve future procurements. Note that lessons learned are collected throughout the entire project, from initiating to planning to executing to monitoring and controlling and closing. However, they are archived in closing. And where do they go? That's right, the PMO, the Project Management Office. Question number 6, true or false? Closed procurements include formal written notice to the seller from the buyer that the contract has been completed. Do you agree? Is this what the buyer does? Does the buyer provide the information? Let's review. The answer to question number 6 is true. Closed procurements include formal written notice to the seller from the buyer that the contract has been completed. The explanation. Requirements for formal procurement closure are usually defined in the terms and conditions of the contract and are included in the procurement management plan. Another nice thing to know is that the information, the process, the terms, and conditions are included in the procurement management plan. Question number 7, blank documentation may be required to be retained by the organization. The closed procurement process ensures this documentation requirement is satisfied. What do you think it is? Let's look at it. The answer to question number 7 is deliverable acceptance is the documentation that may be required to be retained by the organization. The closed procurement process ensures this documentation requirement is satisfied. Let's review the explanation. An output of the closed procurement process, organizational process assets updates, may include deliverable acceptance where documentation of formal acceptance of seller-provided deliverables is provided if required in the contract. It's important that we keep this information for future use. It shows that we have sign-off. It is part of the contractual agreement, which means that we are protected down the road in case any issues happen. And more importantly, we now have the documentation stored and archived, and we can learn from it. We can revisit when necessary. Let's provide a summary of closed procurements. Alignment. Closed procurements is aligned with the closing process group in the procurement management knowledge area. The definition. Closed procurements is the process of completing each procurement. The key benefit of the closed procurements process is that it documents agreements and related documentation for future reference. The key outputs of this process, closed procurements, are the closed procurements and organizational process assets updates. Another key takeaway here is that there are only two processes in closing. One, closed procurements, and the second, closed project or phase. Know that we first close the procurement and then the project or phase. Here are keywords of the process, closed procurements. Procurement audits. The review of contracts and contracting processes for completeness, accuracy, and effectiveness. Project procurement management. Project procurement management includes the processes necessary to purchase or acquire products, services, or results needed from outside the project team. Records management system. A specific set of processes, related control functions, and tools that are consolidated and combined to record and retain information about the project. We have completed the process closed procurements, and in doing so, the knowledge area procurement management plan. In my experience, teaching this class many times and speaking to students who have taken the examination, the PMP, they tell me that focusing on procurement management is important. They sometimes think that there are more questions than they anticipated. Well, sometimes that happens because they catch us by surprise. Maybe we think, well, you know what, we don't have a lot of experience, or I don't have a lot of experience with procurement management, so I'm just going to hope for the best. But instead, go through these lessons again, review them, and focus on areas where you don't really understand. There are no calculations from this knowledge area, so most of it is terminology. I would recommend to you, or I do recommend to you, that you spend significant time with the contracts. You can be asked any type of contract question, and if we don't know the definitions, we don't know the types, it'll catch us by surprise. So the best advice that I can give you is to focus on the contracts, focus on the terms, go back and review the definitions for the processes in procurement management. That is planned procurement management, right? That was the first one. Then we're going to conduct procurements. Then we're going to control procurements. And finally, close procurements. Know the definitions of the four processes and then focus on the details after that. If you do that, you'll be in good shape. I will see you in the next lesson.